What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is December 19th, 2025, about 3 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 17th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 11 of A History of Psychology from Antiquity to Modernity, written by the mysterious Professor Thomas Hardy Leahey. We are currently in chapter 5, where we finished yesterday. We were reading about Descartes and the end of the late antiquity era, and now we're entering to the pre-modern era, the scientific revolution, etc., etc. And where we last left off, we were talking about Descartes. Without further ado, we're going to be finishing our section on Descartes and hopefully all of Chapter 5. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, any books that you think we should review, put it in the comment section. We'll try to get to it. Without further ado, let's continue here. Descartes as psychological psychologist. Descartes as physiological psychologist, While working on his system of physics, Descartes took up the path to psychology through physiology that had begun with Alcmaeon and Empedocles and would ultimately lead to the founding of scientific psychology. In a letter to Mersenne in December 1629, Descartes described how he studied anatomy by watching butchers slaughter cattle and taking parts back to his lodgings for his own dissections. This research took him in a new and exciting direction. 3 years later, he wrote to Mersenne that he would now speak more about man than I had intended to before, because I shall try to explain all of his principal functions. I have already written about those that pertain to life, such as the 5 senses. Now I am dissecting the heads of different animals in order to explain what imagination, memory, etc. consist of. Go into the comment section. All right. KL is acting a fool up in the chat. We're here to learn, sir, but you're more than welcome to leave comments anytime you like. Continuing here. In 1890, William James told his readers to begin their study of psychology by getting a sheep's head from the butcher shop and dissecting its brain. It is important to understand the goal Descartes set for himself in undertaking to give physiological accounts of mental processes, because it is the key to understanding the problems he later created for his own theory of human consciousness and to comprehending his complex, troubling, even contradictory legacy to later psychology. As we have learned, from the time of Aristotle right through the religious Middle Ages, physicians, philosophers, and theologians had attributed most of psychological functions to the animal soul, and therefore to the animal and human bodies. The Islamic philosophers had even proposed specific locations in the brain in which imagination, memory, and so on took place. Within Descartes' renovated Christian framework, however, these older treatments of the faculties were unacceptable, precisely because they endowed matter with soul-like powers. The way Renaissance naturalism endowed matter with magical powers, such as magnetic attraction. Saying that a given piece of brain tissue has the power of memory is not a scientific explanation at all, because it does not specify any mechanism by which memories are created and retrieved. Descartes' aim was to show that a number of psychophysiological functions that had always been recognized as being corporeal could be accounted for in a way which did not render matter sentient. In Le Monde, Descartes described a mechanistic universe that behaved exactly like ours, thus inviting us to believe that it is ours. In L'Homme, Descartes asks us to imagine statues or earthen machines, indeed a man-machine, whose inner operations he described in detail, thus inviting us to believe that they are us, except that they lack a soul. His optimism that he could explain the behavior of animals and much of that of humans as the product of inner machinery was fed by the high artisanship of contemporary craftsmen who could build statues of animals and people that behaved in lifelike ways. Contemporary physicians were even trying to build mechanical replacement body parts. Seeing mechanical statues move and respond to stimuli helped Descartes think that animals were sophisticated machines too. The novelty and dating of Descartes' undertaking are perhaps hard to appreciate today. We live with machines that perceive, remember, and perhaps think, and because we build and program computers, we can explain how they work at whatever level of mathematical or mechanical detail might be demanded. In this decade of the brain, we are learning how the brain's machinery works, down to the biophysics of single cells. Struggling to oust magical occult powers from matter, Descartes set in motion the reduction of mental functions to physiological processes that is only now coming to fruition. Although the details of Descartes' physiological psychology are not important for our purposes here, the conceptual difficulties his approach created for his treatment of the human mind are. The problems for Descartes' psychology, and therefore for all later psychologists, begin when we turn to the human soul, which Descartes, as a Christian, had to exempt from mechanistic explanation. Descartes' account is usually presented as clean and simple, but it is in fact slippery and elusive, a tortured attempt to preserve a Christian soul in a mechanistic universe. Descartes had to avoid two heretical temptations, each of which could be traced to the difficulty of assimilating Aristotle to Christianity. One was called Averroism, after the Latinized name of the Islamic physician-philosopher Ibn Rushd, who first proposed it. Averroism resulted from splitting Aristotle's human mind off from the body and then identifying it with the Christian or Muslim soul. The heresy of Averroism derived from the fact that the Aristotelian mind contained only general knowledge and was therefore not the essence of one's personality, a possibly immortal individual soul. In a religious context, mind was interpreted by Averroes and others, including Ibn Sina, as a divine inner light from God that illuminates general knowledge, but that re-emerges with God at death. In earlier phases of Christianity, Averroism could be resisted by emphasizing, as Aquinas did, the resurrection, when the mind is reunited with its body, reconstituting the whole person. In Descartes' time, however, the idea of the resurrection was fading, being replaced by the idea of immediate judgment of a soul that would live forever in heaven or hell. If the soul was impersonal, however, its reward or suffering became absurd. Thus, it was more important than ever that the soul be one's personal essence, not an inner light from God. The other heretical temptation, called Alexandrism, after Alexander of Aphrodisias, who flourished in the year 200 AD. This arose from dropping Aristotle's sharp distinction of form and matter. Alexandrism denied the immortality of a personal soul and was becoming increasingly tempting through the influence of Renaissance naturalism. In L'Homme, Descartes said that the unique function of the human soul was thinking. Defining the soul by the power of thought or reason is, of course, entirely traditional, stretching back to the ancient Greeks. What is new is Descartes' focus on how thinking separates humans from animals in experience, in behavior, and in the possession of language. First of all, thought makes human experience different from animal experience. Descartes never denied that animals have experience, that is, that they are aware of their surroundings. What they lack is reflective, thoughtful awareness of their own awareness. Descartes wrote, "Animals do not see as we do when we are aware that we see, but only as we do when our mind is elsewhere. In such a case, the image of external objects are depicted on our retinas, and perhaps the impressions that they make in the optic nerves Perhaps the impressions that they make in the optic nerves cause our limbs to make various movements, although we are quite unaware of them. In such a case, we too move just like automata." As did William James centuries later, Descartes here drew a sharp dividing line between simple awareness and self-awareness. James pointed out that much of our behavior can be carried out by simple habit and without thought. In a contemporary example, a driver can respond to a traffic light's turning red without interrupting an intense conversation with a friend. The impression of the red light on the retina causes the driver to carry out the foot movement of hitting the car's brakes. The driver experiences the lights becoming red, but does not think about it because his or her mind is elsewhere in conversation. Secondly, thought makes human behavior more flexible than animal behavior. Animals, Descartes wrote, require some present disposition of every particular action. Hitting the brakes when a traffic light turns red is a present habit that is automatically and thoughtlessly activated by the stimulus of the red light. Descartes viewed animals as machines that always respond in such reflexive ways. Humans, on the other hand, can respond to entirely novel situations by thinking about them. Approaching an intersection where all the lights are out, a driver will drop the ongoing conversation and think carefully about what to do. An animal lacking any stimulus to control its behavior will be frozen into inaction or spurred by some other stimulus into inappropriate action. Behavioral flexibility became the hallmark of mind for James. Concerning animal thought, Descartes was inconsistent. Sometimes he denied that animals think at all. At other times he regarded the question as empirical rather than philosophical, though he said that animal thinking, should it exist, would be quite different from human thinking. After the acceptance of evolution made drawing a sharp line between human and animal more difficult, comparative psychologists tried, with controversial results, to investigate animal thought. The third aspect of human thinking was language, which Descartes regarded as unique to human beings. In Le Homme, language played a crucial role in Descartes' understanding of the human mind, being critical to human self-awareness. Although engaged in conversation, a driver reflexively applies the brakes upon seeing a red traffic light. Seeing eye dogs are trained to stop themselves and their master when they see a red light. At this level of reflexive response, there is no difference between the driver and the dog. However, according to Descartes' analysis, only the driver, as a human being, can think about traffic lights and think the thought that the red light means stop. The trained dog stops too, but it cannot formulate the proposition, red means stop. Being able to think about red lights in this way gives humans the ability to think about experience reflectively, rather than simply having it. Animals do not think as we do, if they think at all, because they cannot think about linguistically stated propositions. For Descartes, the ability of the human soul to formulate propositions did not, however, depend on acquiring any particular human language. He proposed that there is an innate human language of the mind, of which actual human languages are outward translations. Thus, while our driver says, red means stop, and a German driver says, rot bedeutet halten, at a deeper level, each thinks the same thought, linking the concept of redness of traffic light to need to stop one's motor vehicle. Questions concerning the role of language in thinking and its presence or absence in animals have proven enormously controversial in the centuries since Descartes. Some philosophers and psychologists have followed Descartes in closely linking language and thought, while others have strongly disagreed. In the 1960s, linguist Noam Chomsky proposed a Cartesian linguistics in which language was a unique, species-specific property of the human mind, and his student Jerry Fodor dubbed Descartes' universal inner language mentalese. Cartesian linguistics played a large role in the downfall of behaviorism, which saw no essential dividing line between human and beast, and in the creation of the field of cognitive science, which aligns humans with language using computers instead of non-language using animals. In 1748, a French philosopher suggested teaching language to apes as a way of defeating Descartes' belief in the soul, a project carried out with uncertain results by behaviorists defending themselves from Chomsky's belief in the mind. Unfortunately, Descartes never completed the part of Le Homme in which he planned to give a scientific treatment of the human soul. In 1633, as he suppressed publication of Le Monde, he abandoned the study of physiology and the writing of L'Homme. Faced with the possibility that his science might be condemned like Galileo's, he turned to providing it with an unshakable philosophical foundation. For the development of psychology, Descartes' new direction was fateful. It created the concept of consciousness, the definition of psychology as the science that studies consciousness, and a set of deep, perhaps intractable problems with which psychology has struggled to the present day. Descartes as philosopher. As an early scientist, Descartes was concerned with philosophical issues, most importantly a project of discovering or creating methodological rules that should guide scientific thinking, setting it apart from religious dogma and from occult mysticism. As Aristotle's physics crumbled before the research of the scientific revolution, it became widely believed that he had gone astray because he had relied on poor methods for theorizing about and investigating nature. Descartes wanted the new science to be guided by a better methodology, and for some years he fitfully worked on writing rules for the direction of the mind. Eventually he abandoned it, but it was published posthumously in 1684. In 1635, he returned to giving science its epistemological foundation in Discourse on the Method of Rightly Conducting One's Reason and Seeking the Truth in the Sciences, and the briefer but more influential Meditations on First Philosophy. Here began a new psychological style of philosophizing that remained central to psychology for centuries. Descartes investigated his own mind in order to develop a foundational philosophy. Plato and Platonism wanted to move through the mind and then away from it to the transcendental forms. Aristotle, believing in a realist theory of perception, thought to find philosophical truths, including truths about morality, in nature itself. Descartes had the new realm of consciousness to explore, and he plunged into it in search of philosophical truth. From now on, psychological investigations of the human mind will be the basis for philosophical proposals about knowledge and morality. In the Discourse, Descartes described how he found his philosophy. Returning home after military service at the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II, he spent one day, possibly November 10th, 1619, in a stove-heated room meditating on his own thoughts and formulating the basic principles of his philosophy. Descartes wanted to find a firm philosophical foundation for the apparently dangerous science he was developing, and to find his foundation, he adopted a method of radical doubt. He resolved to systematically doubt every belief he had, even those no sane person would doubt, until he found something so evidently true that it could not be doubted. His aim was not to actually cast doubt on common sense truths, but to force himself to find sound reasons for believing them. In a sense, Descartes was subjecting himself to Socrates' Alunchus, seeking explicit reasons for holding intuitively obvious beliefs and thereby providing a foundation for his scientific investigations. Descartes found he could doubt the existence of God, the validity of his own sensations, of his body. He continued in this way until he found one thing he could not doubt, his own existence as a self-conscious, thinking thing. Res cogitans. One cannot doubt that one doubts, for in doing so, one makes real the very action supposedly in doubt. Doubting is an act of thinking, and Descartes expressed his first indubitable truth as the famous cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I am a thing that thinks, and that is all. The soul, the thinking thing, was a spiritual substance wholly without matter, not occupying space, unextended, and completely separate from the body. Descartes proposed a radical new dualism in which soul and body are completely different, sharing neither matter nor form. Nor is the soul conceived as the form of the body. Instead, the soul dwells within the mechanical body as a sort of ghost, receiving sensations from it and commanding it by acts of will. In the context of the 17th century, making the soul a spiritual substance was a way of reconciling science and religion. The science explained the physical world, and religion explained the soul. Descartes' dualism of soul and body was also a way of explaining the dualism of secondary and primary sense properties. According to Descartes, the material world was made of corpuscles, or atoms, which possess only the properties of extension in space and physical location. In addition to that material world, which includes the body, there is a subjective world of consciousness and mind. Perhaps this second world is spiritual as well, for God and the soul are not material. In any case, as far as human knowledge is concerned, Descartes concluded that there are two worlds, an objective, scientifically knowable, mechanical material world, the world as it really is, and a subjective world of human consciousness known through introspection, the world of a person as a thinking being. Descartes was not the first to prove his own existence from mental activity. St. Augustine had said, "If I am deceived, I exist." And Parmenides had said, "For it is the same thing to think and to be." What was new and carried profound implications was Descartes' radical reflexivity, his focus on the self and his invention of consciousness as a thing that could be studied. Augustine had turned inward and found God. Descartes turned inward and found only himself. It is a momentous point in the history of psychology and philosophy, and we need to carefully examine it and its implications. Descartes' argument of the cogito created consciousness as an object of scrutiny by radically dividing the self from conscious experience. Prior to the scientific revolution, people had assumed that the world was as it seemed to be, and had simply lived in and through experience. However, the division of the primary and secondary sense properties destroyed the traditional naive belief in the validity of experience. Descartes built on this distinction by claiming that we can step back from our experience and examine it as a collection of objects, sensations, that are not part of the self. Imagine you are looking at a green leaf. Now I ask you to look at the green more closely. In the older, naive view, you would simply take yourself to be carefully inspecting the green that the leaf really is. Descartes, however, asks you to do something different, to think about your sensation of green and how greenness appears in consciousness. Looked at this way, you are no longer inspecting the leaf. You are introspecting a bit of consciousness, the sensation of green. A useful way to think of the model of experience Descartes is setting up has been suggested by Daniel Dennett. He calls Descartes' model of mind the Cartesian theater. A viewer, the inner self, the existence of which Descartes has apparently proved by the cogito, looks at a screen on which the visual stimuli from the retina are projected. Naively, when we see the image of a leaf, we believe we are seeing an actual leaf outside us. If, however, the Cartesian theater is true, what the self actually sees is not a leaf, but the projected image of a leaf. Introspection then consists of thinking of the image as an image, and then inspecting the image without reference to the object outside. The accompanying figure, 5.5, from Leahey, shows a physiological model of the Cartesian theater, which reveals important features of the new conception of consciousness that would deeply inform psychological research and theory for centuries to come. The illustration shows the brain, the eyes, and the nerves carrying information from the eyes inward to the brain as the eye/brain looks at an archer's arrow. The image of the arrow is projected by light rays onto the retina. From the retina, nerves carry the image inward to the brain, and the image is then cast on the surface of the pineal gland. The location of interaction between the soul and body, according to Descartes. Descartes' model of visual perception makes two important points. First, it provides a physiological, and thus for Descartes, mechanical, explanation of the new representational theory of perception created by the scientific revolution. We, our non-mechanical, non-physical souls, do not see the world directly, but only as a projection on a physical screen, specifically the pineal gland. Second, the image we see is a composite of sensations, not a whole, meaningful object in itself. The illustration tracks certain points of physical stimulation via rays of light projecting onto the corresponding sensation points on each retina. These retinal point stimulations are each carried out These retinal point stimulations are each carried by separate nerves to the pineal gland, where they create projected pixel-like points on the surface of the pineal gland. This suggests that our idea of any object is a collection of associated smaller ideas of particular stimulus properties, such as color and luminance. Descartes' model will be developed by important thinkers in the 18th century and will provide the standard view of consciousness among early psychologists until the Gestalt movement in the early 20th century. Consider a newspaper photograph that depicts a space shuttle on the launch pad. You might say, "I see the shuttle," but in fact you are seeing an image of the shuttle, not the shuttle itself, and closer examination will reveal the image to be much fuzzier than you first thought. Look even more closely and you will see the picture is made up of gray and black dots that you didn't notice when you first naively saw the shuttle. Descartes says conscious experience is like a theater or a photograph, an image the self naively takes to be real. But an image like that can be examined as a thing, consciousness itself, through a special kind of inward observation called introspection. With the Cartesian theater, the psychology of consciousness was born, although it was not yet a science. After Descartes, it was generally taken for granted that consciousness is a collection of sensations projected to the mind. The self can then reflectively examine them. Natural science continued to examine the world naively as a collection of objects to be carefully observed and about which theories might be propounded and tested. Psychological science became defined as the reflective, introspective study of sensations qua sensations. By submitting experience to experimental control, sensations could be carefully observed, and theories about them might be propounded and tested. Thinking of experience as an object consciousness, apart from the things causing it, gave rise in the mid-19th century to both scientific psychology and modern art. Modern art began when painters rebelled against the idea of art as representation and asked viewers to look at the surface of the canvas. Traditional art, like traditional theories of perception, focused on the thing representing. The goal of a landscape, for example, was to show how a mountain or lake really was. Modern artists, however, wanted viewers to look at the canvas, seeing not what the artist saw, but the subjective impression created in the artist by the mountain or lake. Okay, let's take a look here. So here we have an arrow. This is figure 5.5. The psychological model of the Cartesian theater from Descartes' Leahey. The self, H in the figure, so the self is somewhere here, sees the world indirectly via the image of the arrow projected on the pineal gland. The Gestalt psychologists will later argue that this theory of mind as a mirror led psychology down a profoundly mistaken path. Okay. So yeah, basically it's the idea that, imagine there's like a little man inside of your brain watching a movie of everything that you're doing right now. In Descartes' model, essentially, that little man watching the movie is the true self. So what you're seeing, what that little man sees on the screen, the leaf you're holding, an arrow, a gun in your hand, whatever, right? These are just images that he's seeing on the screen, the true self. All right, well, anyway. So along with consciousness, the Cartesian theater created the modern point-like self. According to Descartes, the soul was like a mathematical point located in, but not actually occupying any space, and doing but one thing, thinking. Thinking of the soul as a point was radically new. For the Greeks and others, including Christians such as Aquinas, a person had been taken to the embodied soul, including the faculties of the animal soul, that was directly connected to the world outside by experience. According to the argument of the cogito, on the other hand, our essence is a small, self-aware point of pure thought, dwelling in the Cartesian theater, detached from the body and even from experience, which it receives secondhand via projection on the screen of the Cartesian theater. Such a small self became easy to erase and paradoxically to inflate. Augustine looked inside himself and found God. Descartes looked inside himself and seemed to find himself. However, the leading British philosopher of the next century, David Hume, looked inside himself and found sensations and images from the world and the body, but no self. Rejecting this alarming conclusion, the leading German philosopher, Kant, could not find a self either, but posited it as a logical necessity. He then imbued it with enormous powers, and his followers, the German idealists, said that the invisible self is so powerful it creates the universe. Well, that's a lot. In the psychology of consciousness, the point-like self was called on to control, observe, and precisely report on experience. In the psychology of the unconscious, the point-like self became the ego, only partly able to manage the ferocious desires of the animal id. In the psychology of adaptation, following in the footsteps of Hume, the soul began to disappear, merging with the screen of consciousness itself. In the 20th century, behaviorism and cognitive science have done without consciousness and self altogether, content to study what we do rather than what we are. By splitting off experience from the self and making it a thing, consciousness to be studied, Descartes made psychology possible and philosophically important. As a philosopher and scientist, Descartes wanted to know how the world really is. For traditional philosophies, this was not a problem. Experience was thought to reveal the world directly to us. However, in Descartes' scheme, the thinking self is trapped in the Cartesian theater, seeing only a projection of the world, not the world itself. Consciousness was indelibly subjective, a presentation of how the world is for us. For it to be the basis of science and of knowledge more generally, it had to be purged of its subjectivity. This made it imperative to study us, to practice psychology, so that the subjective contribution to examine might be subtracted, leaving only objective. In the next century, during the Enlightenment, psychology became even more important as philosophers moved to base ethics, politics, and the definition of a good society on the study of human nature. All right, we're going to be continuing here. I just want to really check real quick. Okay, we only have 2 more sections. We only have 2 more pages, and then we're done with this chapter 5. Okay, so that's cool. There's a lot in the conclusion, though. Sorry, it's not 2 more pages. There are 2 more sections, I guess. This is still chapter 5, right? Yeah. Okay, so there's multiple conclusions. So that one conclusion is just on Descartes, not on the entire chapter. Okay, I was just checking. Okay. We're going to be coming back here. Hold on. All right, so yeah, here we are. All right, we're going to be coming back here real quick. Let me just check something. Just checking real quick. I got some work I need to do, but hopefully nobody shows up so I can still hang out with y'all. Or save this for posterity for the people that are studying. Let's see. I'm going to keep this open right here. Just in case. All right, so I can't see the chat, but I'll be switching every now and then. If anybody jumps in, I will be doing my thing. You feel me? All right. Just making sure this is where we left off, right? Yep. All right, so. All right, so we only have, 10 more pages or so? So let's do this. Difficulties with Cartesian philosophy and psychology. Descartes' radically new conception of soul and body was in tune with the scientific revolution, which had begun to question the validity of perception and to think of the world as a machine. His psychology and his followers and his followers' variants of it quickly swept over the intellectual world of Europe, becoming the starting point from which virtually every psychologist and philosopher began, even when they disagreed with the details of Descartes' theory. Nevertheless, Cartesian dualism faced a number of difficulties, some old, some new. One old problem remained from earlier dualistic conceptions of the soul, such as Plato's, the homunculus problem. Other difficulties emerged in the later course of psychological research. Descartes himself addressed two new ones. The first new problem was how the mind, or soul, and body interact. Descartes attempted to create a physiological mechanism by which the interaction takes place. He proposed that the pineal gland was not only the site of the Cartesian theater, but also furnished the means by which the soul controlled the body. Being at the base of the brain, the pineal gland was, Descartes thought, the place where the nerve tubes from the body enter the brain. The soul could cause the pineal gland to tilt this way and that, directing the movement of the animal spirits in the nerves and commanding the motion of the body. Descartes' theory of interaction was eventually rendered wildly implausible by advances in the study of the brain, but it always had a philosophical problem it never surmounted. The problem was perhaps first noticed by one of Descartes' most prolific correspondents and acute critics, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, born 1615 and died in 1680. They met in the Netherlands in 1642, and it seems they fell in love, although their love was never consummated. Descartes later dedicated 2 books to her, praising both her beauty and her acute intelligence. They wrote letters both philosophical and intimate for a number of years. In them, Elizabeth raised dualism's greatest shortcoming. How can material body and spiritual soul interact? In June 1643, Elizabeth wrote to Descartes that she could not comprehend how the soul, non-extended and immaterial, can move the body, and how can body be pushed by something immaterial, which cannot have any communication with it. Descartes replied with a vague argument about the unity of the mind and body. In her next letter of July 1st, 1643, Elizabeth restated her perplexity over soul-body interaction. I too find that the senses show me that the soul moves the body, but they fail to teach me any more than the understanding of the imagination, the manner in which she does it. Perhaps there are unknown properties in the soul that make interaction possible, but the matter remains mysterious. I will despair of finding certitude in any matter unless you provide me with it. In reply to this letter, Descartes expressed his concern about the princess's health. He did not wish to further aggravate the princess, and so he terminated the correspondence, and mind-body interaction was left unresolved. The first patches to Descartes' psychology were sown in an effort to answer Elizabeth's question of how an immaterial ghost, the soul, can push the material pineal gland, the body, or be affected by it. Eventually, as we will see, instead of dumping the Cartesian theater, philosophers and psychologists kept the point-like mind, but denied that the mind and body interact, violating Elizabeth's natural intuition that the soul moves the body. The second new difficulty with Descartes' position is called by philosophers the problem of other minds. If mind is a point-like, thinking substance locked up in the body, how do I know mine is not the only soul in the universe? I know I have a soul from the argument of the cogito, but how do I know that you or Leonardo DiCaprio has one? As he had in his scientific works, Descartes responded by pointing to language. From my own self-awareness, I know that I think and that I express my thoughts in language. Therefore, any creature that possesses language, all human beings, and only human beings possess language, thinks, and so has a mind. As suggested earlier, the problems for Descartes' analysis were not long in coming. If soulless animals could learn language, perhaps people also lacked souls. Evolution undermined Descartes' radical discontinuity between humans and animals, and today computers, mere machines, may soon speak as we do. Along with his dualism and emphasis on reason, Descartes' nativism links him to Plato. Descartes found in himself ideas that derived from experience, such as of trees or rocks, and ideas that the mind invented, such as sirens and hippogriffs. But he also found in himself ideas that could not be traced to any sensation, in which, being universal ideas, he did not think he could have invented. These included such ideas as those of God, the mind, and mathematical objects. Descartes proposed that these ideas come not from the senses, but from certain germs of truth, which exist naturally in our souls, implanted by God. Thus, the indubitable principal truths are innate. As for Plato, they are potential ideas only. They require activism by experience. All right, we're going to go to this consciousness section here. It is generally recognized today that Descartes' philosophy failed to negotiate its way between the heresies he wishes to avoid, specifically by denying personal memory to the soul. He fell into avarism, and his works here, in fact, placed on the Catholic Church's Index of Prohibited Books in 1663. At the popular level, Descartes was often identified with Faust, who sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. A story, entirely false, began to circulate in the 18th century that Descartes had built a mechanical girl in the image of his own illegitimate daughter, Francine, and it was said to be so lifelike that the two could not be told apart. There were intimations that he had sexual relations with the doll. By then, some thinkers had taken the controversial step that Descartes never took, proclaiming that humans were mere machines like the animals, and the story, no doubt, arose as a response to such a shocking idea. Today, Descartes' psychology is under assault. By reducing mind to a point, by making experience a mystery, by making experience a mysterious, subjective thing called consciousness, by assuming there is a point in the brain where experience happens, and by creating the problem of other minds and the issue of interaction, it appears that Descartes dug a hole from which psychology is now escaping. Cartesian dualism also introduced a paranoid streak of modern thinking. Descartes did not mean for his method of radical doubt to actually cast doubt on beliefs in the external world or God. However, by introducing the notion that the mind is only acquainted with its own ideas, as Locke put it, Descartes invited later thinkers to doubt that ideas represent the world at all. In the 18th century, philosophical psychologists would come to doubt the existence of the external world, the possibility of human knowledge, and the foundations of morality. In the 19th century, Freud led people to doubt the sincerity of their own motives, including paranoia to the inner world of the mind that Descartes thought he was the sole reservoir of truth. However, because the hole Descartes dug was deep, Descartes' influence cannot be denied. His framework created the idea of psychology as the study of consciousness and made the search for self-understanding an important one. Interestingly, a variation on Descartes' framework was more immediately influential. It was more commonsensical, more intuitive, less encumbered with metaphysics, and informed by Newton's Principia, published 37 years after Descartes' death. It was the attempt at scientific psychology made by the physician-philosopher John Locke, as we will see in the next chapter. All right, so we're going to pick up on this part here, consciousness quantified, Godfrey Wilhelm Leibniz. Next time, I gotta get to work. It's been a pleasure rocking with y'all. Hopefully you found that interesting. Let me know if you have any comments. Hit the like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and peace.